first look at this book of Colossians. Let me ask you a question. I have some pictures on the screen. I'm going to set this down over here, Dean. How many remember you might want to call the golden years of the Pittsburgh Steelers, the 1970s? How many remember that? Kind of lived through that, right? So who was our star quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers then? Terry Bradshaw. There he is right there. How about some other names? Who were our two wide receivers? Stallworth and Lynn Swann, exactly right. And then we had the famous Steel Curtain, didn't we? Who can name all four of the Steel Curtain? Pete, can you name them?
Ernie Holmes, L.C. Greenwood, Dwight White, and Joe Green.
Right, exactly right, exactly right.
That's my number.
Yeah.
That's my number.
There he is. Now, how many remember this next guy? Put his picture up there, Lydia. How many remember him? Theo Bell. Anybody remember Theo Bell? Nobody remembers Theo Bell. Theo Bell was a specialty teams guy. He ran back kickoffs. He was a wide receiver also, but he had some great stats and everything, and he got all the Super Bowl rings just like everybody else did, but kind of no one remembers him or knows who he is. But the specialty teams are pretty important, aren't they? Right? I mean, you can't win games without good specialty teams, without field goal teams, without kickoff teams. Pete actually was on a kickoff return team, right, Pete? Yeah. Pete got 3 yards, I think, on a kickoff return. He's in the record books, exactly right. But specialty teams are so important, right? I'll tell you, how many know who these two guys are? Show the basketball. Who are these two guys? Steph Curry and Kevin Durant, exactly right. Now, they had an amazing run, right? Championships, a couple back-to-backs, another one in there. How many remember what their what their theme was, their logo was? Do you remember? Do you know, Tim? Anybody know? Put it up there. Next one. Strength in numbers. Strength in numbers. Now, they had some stars, but one of the things they said is, listen, we need to be deep also. Right? Their strength in numbers. That could kind of be maybe a subtitle for our message today. Today we're talking about focus on friends. And so here at the end of the book of Colossians, now I'm going to make a statement, and I'll probably be wrong. Someone will probably say, no, I've done this, but we're studying the end of the book of Colossians. And I'm willing to, well, maybe I'm not willing to make a bet, but I'm thinking that no one has ever studied, ever, what we're going to talk about today. What we're going to look at from chapter 4, verses 7 and on. I bet most people have never even read it. Because you know why? You know what it reads like? It reads like, I asked Pete this yesterday. I said, Pete, do you ever sit and read through the credits at the end of a movie? And he said, yeah, I do. I go, you do not. He goes, oh, maybe I look for a name of a song or something like that. But who sits there and reads through all the names, right? All the names at the credits. You read through every one of them. Does he sit through the end of the movie? And you do too. I'm going to have to go to a movie with you because I'm not calling you a liar, but I don't believe either one of you. I just don't. I don't believe. For one thing, it scrolls so fast that you can't even read all the names. You pause it to read all the names. Well, Dean, she needs to go talk to somebody. My point is, at the end of Colossians, I'll be honest with you, it kind of reads that way. It kind of reads, this. And how many of you, when you can't pronounce a name, you just kind of, and then he called, and then you just kind of go on, and it doesn't really mean anything. The name doesn't mean anything. You don't know anything about them, and so why would you even think about, doing an in-depth Bible study on these names? Well, that's exactly what we're going to do today. And I promise you it's not going to be boring. Now, let me just give you a reminder of the context of this. Paul he's under house arrest in Rome. And Paul's he's writing a couple letters that he's getting sent off to these churches. And so he's, concerned for the things that are going on in the churches, and he's trying to give them some direction. So he closes out his letter in Colossians with this list of names. Now, these are actually kind of Paul's specialty team unit, right? These people that he's going to mention, that we're going to take a look at. And what's amazing to me is that, like, even the great Paul couldn't do this alone, couldn't live life, couldn't do the things that he did. He couldn't do it alone. And so here's what we're going to do. We're going to look at 6 essential, maybe essential is not the right word, or indispensable. Maybe I'm using too large of words, but types of friendships. And I want you to see how important it is to when you study the Bible, when you look at things, to do some extra work. Okay, so in order to talk about this properly, I found a couple studies that were done. There was a 20-year study that was done, and here's what they found. Just kind of the end of it. They found that people have far fewer friends today than we did just 20 years ago. 20. I mean, that's not a terribly long time, despite the increase in, or maybe because of the increase in social media, right? I mean, a lot of times, how many of you, I'm off all social media now because I got hacked. And you know what? And I find I don't even miss it. I used to be on it every day, not every day, but looking at it all the time, and I haven't done it now in about a month and a half, and I just don't miss it, right? And my friends that I have, I see them, but you look on there and you go, I have 800 friends. You don't have 800 friends. You have 800 names on your social media, but you do not have 800 friends. Another study from Duke University found this, that 1/4 of Americans have no close friends at all. Like that just blows me away, a statistic like that. 1/4 of Americans have no close friends. Years ago, I used to meet with a couple different pastors that I've known pretty much my whole life. And we would go out, and the one pastor, many of you probably even know him, he's just a real outgoing person. Everybody knows him and everything. And the other guy actually is at the church where he left that church, and he's there and so forth. And we got talking about our friends and so forth. And he said, wow, you guys are so lucky. I go, what do you mean? He goes, I don't have any friends. I go, what do you mean you don't have any friends? He said, there's nobody that I could go talk to or sit with or anything. He goes, I don't have any friends. I said, not even in the church. He goes, especially not in the church. I know, that's really strange. Like, you have no friends in the church. That doesn't even make, I don't even understand that, But I think that's for a long time, that was almost something that pastors didn't want to do. I can't get close to people because I'm going to be hurt, or I'm going to hurt them, or whatever. Or they might find out that I'm just a normal guy, right? How many of you have been to a church where you're in church and you think, that the pastor is somehow more of what, I don't know, right? On a pedestal, and he should be this perfect individual. And so when that's put on them, they feel like they have to maintain that sort of image. And so to do that, the only way to do that is to separate yourself from people. Because if you're around people long enough, they're going to find that you're just a normal person. You're a normal guy. And you're just I just do this as a job, right? And so he said he had no friends. So why is it, why do you think, or I ask myself this, why do I think that this is true? Why do people have less friends today than they did even 20 years ago? Why is it kind of going this way? Well, I think maybe because we're so busy, right? We're more distracted. We're very task-oriented. And also, too, our society has been going in a direction where it's more about me, right? And so we have less time for others. So the question is this: what can we take away from studies like this, right? If this is true, I think we all know in our hearts that friendship is important. It's needed. You need to have friends in your life, right? You can't live this life alone. I think the takeaway would be this, that friendship is something that we need to learn to be intentional about. Friendships, I personally don't think they happen by accident. You may say, oh, I just fell in this relationship, but still, friendships, take work, take time to be with somebody, to learn what somebody's like. And it's not about volume, right? It's not about how many friends that you have. Some people have a lot of friends, some people have a few friends, but it's about the quality of those friends, right? And the character of the person and the relationship. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to look at the end of this letter, and we're going to look at these names, right? But what we have to do is we have to go elsewhere to find out about these people, right? You can't just read the names there. The names are in a context of the whole narrative of Paul's life. Isn't that true? Right? And so you have to look elsewhere and you have to find out who were these people that Paul's talking about, that Paul is giving some credit to at the end of this letter. I mean, they have to be some important people. And so let's kind of look at them a little bit, all right? So 6 types of essential friends. Number 1, everybody needs, if you're taking notes, write this down. Everybody needs a helping friend whose hand is always there. So let's read this in Colossians 4, 7, and 8. So you might pronounce his name Tychicus or Tychicus. Tychicus will tell you the news about me. He's a dear brother and faithful minister and fellow servant in the Lord. I'm sending him to you for the express purpose that you may know about our circumstance and that he may encourage your hearts. So you read that name Tychicus and you go, okay, so somebody that Paul knows, and Paul's sending Tychicus to the church here just to pass along information. So let's talk about Tychicus for a minute. First off, I found that Tychicus' name means lucky. I don't know, maybe they called him lucky, right? But that's what his name means, lucky. Now, has anybody ever heard of him before? Tychicus? Tychicus actually is mentioned 5 times in the Bible. So let's kind of go back and let's kind of find some different times where he's mentioned. The first time we meet Tychicus is in chapter 20 of Acts. And Paul comes up with a plan. He hatches a plan because one of his greatest desires, Paul, in his ministry, is for Jewish and Gentile believers to come together. And so Paul kind of hatches this plan, and he does this. He says, what we're going to do is I'm going to take up some offerings in some of these Gentile churches in Macedonia, which is modern-day Greece. And I'm going to take up three separate offerings, and I'm going to take it to Jerusalem. Now, there was a famine in the land, and so the people in the church were, going without food. And so Paul says, if I could show them that these Gentile believers in Macedonia care so much for them that they're giving of their resources to help them, maybe it's going to help kind of bring them together. Show them how much these non-Jewish believers care for them. Now, not only does he decide to bring the money, but he says, I'm also going to bring a representative to show them that, listen, these people are just like you. They're no different than you. How many of you, like even today, you see all the division in the world, and you hear all this, it seems like they're always trying to get groups to be against one another. And so if you let yourself, you can fall into that and go, yeah, they are the bad person. We're all looking for scapegoats for all our situations in life, all our bad situations. So, it's them, it's this group, right? And then you meet them. Like when I lived in France, and so made some acquaintances, made some friendships with some French people, and they would say, "Wow, you're not like other Americans." And I go, "Like, what do you mean?" Well, and they describe Americans, and I go, "Well, how many Americans do you know?" He said, "Well, you're the first." You know what I mean? You're not like the others. I go, "Listen, it's just this what media puts out there." right? I said, French people, when I come back to America, people say, oh, those French people, that must have been miserable. And I go, why? Oh, because French people are a certain way. And I go, I didn't see that at all. French people were wonderful. I loved it where I lived in a small village in Albertville, and the people were just as friendly as anywhere. My point is this: Paul says, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring, one of these Gentile believers, and you're going to see they don't bite. They're just like you. Guess who he brings? Tychicus. He brings Tychicus along with him. Now, so Tychicus goes on this trip with Paul. Now, this isn't like a trip where they got in their they got in their mini SUV and they drove over land and hill, right? What you need to know about this trip is during the trip, the wheels came off. Ever been on a trip like that? Where, the wheels just one thing after another. Well, they have a trip like this. They experience riots, there's misunderstandings, there's beatings, there's arrests. It's unbelievable. And Paul keeps getting the brunt of all this, keeps getting detained and falsely accused and everything. But yet we read that none of this happens to Lucky, right? He goes on this trip with Paul and none of this happens to him. The next time we see him, so that was Acts 20, the next time we see him here is in Colossians 4:7, also in Ephesians 6:21. Paul was under house arrest again. And Tychicus happened, now he's been traveling with Paul. He's under house arrest. Tychicus is free. Lucky is free. And he calls Lucky in, calls him in. He says, here's what I want you to do. I want you to deliver these letters. What letters? Well, the letter of Colossians, the one we've been studying. I want you to deliver the letter of Colossians. I want you to deliver this letter that I'm sending to the Ephesian church as well. So I want you to take these, and you're going to travel thousands of miles. Also the book of Philemon, the letter to Philemon too. He said, I want you to take these 3 letters and you're going to cross thousands of miles over sea to 3 different places. And you know what does Lucky say? What does Tychicus say? Tychicus says, absolutely. Absolutely, Paul. I got this. Don't worry, I'm your man. Right? This is the helpful friend. Tychicus is always there. Let me tell you, I have a lot of friends. I have a guy who is like Tychicus, and that's Pete. Pete is always, and I'm not going to do this every one of these, right? But I just wanted to say that Pete is always there. Always there. If I ever call him and say that I need something, he's always like Tychicus. He says, I'm your man. I'm there. It doesn't even matter if somebody will say, Pete, I need your help. I haven't even said what it is. He goes, yep, okay, I'm there. Everybody needs this kind of friend, and everybody needs to learn how also to be this kind of friend. So he delivers these 3 letters, Colossians, Ephesians, and this little book, Philemon, which we're going to talk about here in a minute because it comes back into play. There's even more. Years later, Paul was imprisoned again. This time, he's in prison under this crazy leader by the name of Nero. And Nero was this Caesar that, when Rome burned, he blamed it on the Christians, and he started gathering up all the Christians, around Rome and rounding them up and killing them, except for, guess who? Who gets away? Lucky. Tychicus gets away from Nero. And so then, at the end of the book of Titus, Paul is in prison. And he's going to be put to death. He's going to be put to death by Nero. Tychicus is free, and so he writes this letter to Titus. You following me so far? So Paul writes this letter to Titus, who is a pastor on the island of Crete. And so here's what he says. He said, "Listen, I'm going to be put to death by Nero, but what I'd really like, Titus, is for you to come and visit me before I die. I'd really like to see you before I die. So I'm going to send somebody." I've already asked him, and guess what he said? He said, of course I'll go. I'm going to send somebody to be a fill-in pastor for you when you come here. And who does he send? He sends Tychicus. So Paul finds that Tychicus. Now here's the thing. History tells us that the church on the island of Crete was a very, very difficult church, right? Very, very, very divisive and very, just a very difficult place. So he says, who can I send? Listen, Tychicus, he gets along with everybody. I'm going to send him there, and he's going to be the fill-in pastor. And Paul writes another letter. His last letter he writes to Timothy, who is a pastor in Ephesus. And he says the same thing to him. And he says, I'm going to send Tychicus to fill in for you. Now, if you just look, this guy, Tychicus is kind of everywhere in the Bible. You just have to do a little bit of work looking for him. Now, here's what I want you to hear in this. Some of you look at people and go, well, that's a Paul. I could never be a Paul, right? Not everybody can be a Paul. And you are this person who is always there, who says, listen, I'll help, I'll do whatever it takes. But I haven't told you what it is yet. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what it is. This is what I want to do. I want to help. You need to move your furniture in your house. I'm there. I'm going to do it. You need picked up at the airport. I'm there, right? You need to regrade your entire property over a week. That's what we just did this past week. Pete says, I'm there. Brings his own equipment, comes there, and we work for a week. He said, I'm there, absolutely. And so my point in saying this is this. Sometimes that person can look at themselves and go, I'm really not much, right? Let me tell you something. If it weren't for Tychicus, we wouldn't have done this study in this letter to the Colossian church, would we? No. Tychicus was there to take the letter and deliver it to the church. Listen, this letter that we studied, that Tychicus delivered, it outlasted the Roman Empire, didn't it? It outlasted the Roman Empire. It even outlasted the churches to whom it was delivered to. So just never, ever, ever despise these types of things, what some might call a small thing. Tychicus was a faithful, helping friend. And here's the thing, friends. You never know, and you may never know, the ripple effects of the help that you give. So never despise little things. At the end of this section, now we'll get off Tychicus for a minute. At the end of this section, in verse 15, Paul meets this woman and says this, greet those in Laodicea and Nympha. Nympha is a woman's name, and the church that meets in her house. Now obviously, Nympha is mentioned here by Paul. And all she did, what did she do? She probably had the gift of hospitality. All she did was open up her home. She opened up her home and she gets mentioned in the New Testament. So never put yourself down for small things. Okay, now, so not all of Paul's friends that we're going to see here were ones who gave to him. Paul also gave. The next kind of friend that, now, if you're going to write this down, just hold tight and listen till I develop this, okay? The next type of friend is a weak friend. A weak friend. Paul says, whose burden I bear. Now, we all need this type of person in our life, this type of friend in our life, a person, I say weak person, a person who's in need. A person who's in need. Maybe their life is kind of, going south or whatever. And we all need this kind of person in our life. Well, why is that? Well, it helps us to get our focus off ourselves. To know that there's other people out there so we don't stay self-centered. So this is what it says. Listen. He is Tychicus. Tychicus, is coming with Onesimus. Have you ever heard that name before? Coming with Onesimus. Our faithful and dear brother, who is one of you. They will tell you everything that is happening here. So you think you read that and you go, oh, Onesimus. Onesimus, he's just a normal guy, and he's going with Tychicus, and he's a dear brother. Okay, let's learn who Onesimus is. Who is this guy? What's his story? Well, it turns out that Onesimus was a slave. And he was a slave to a guy here in Colossae, in this church. And guess who he was a slave to? A guy by the name of Philemon. So Onesimus actually is a runaway slave. Now, do you know anything about first century? You know that a runaway slave most often was put to death. And they were put to death by crucifixion. You see those old movies like, I don't know, I can't remember what it was, maybe Spartacus or whatever. They're riding into town, right? And along the road were all these crosses, and people were being crucified on these crosses. They were runaway slaves. And so Philemon has this slave, Onesimus, and he runs away. So let's find out what happens. Onesimus runs away, and he goes to what would you do if you're a runaway slave? Well, you want to just kind of disappear, don't you? You want to kind of go somewhere where there are thousands of faces, and you're just another face in the crowd, and you kind of just disappear. Well, he goes to get lost in Rome, and he runs smack dab into, Paul. And Paul meets him, and Paul actually ends up leading him to a relationship with Christ, right? Leading him into this, what was called the way. And so Onesimus becomes a follower of Jesus. Now, so Paul writes a letter to Philemon. Now watch what Paul says to Philemon, who formerly owned Onesimus, right? So you got the context, right? That's the context of this. Now here's what he writes. He says, although in Christ, this is Paul, although in Christ I could be bold and order you to do what you ought to do. He's writing to who? Philemon. To do what you ought to do. Yet I prefer to appeal to you on the basis of love. I appeal to you for my son, Onesimus, who became my son. In other words, what he's saying is I led him into a relationship with Jesus. So he calls him his son. So he said, who became my son while I was in chains. Perhaps the reason he was separated from you for a little while was that you might have him back forever, no longer a slave, but better than a slave, a dear brother. He is very dear to me, but even dearer to you, both as a fellow man and as a brother in the Lord. So if you consider me a partner, welcome him as you would welcome me. Basically saying, listen, Philemon, you know the right thing to do. I can make you do it, but you know the right thing to do, so do it. So what does Philemon do? The Bible doesn't say. Doesn't it tick you off? Like, what happened? Like, I want to know what happened. But the Bible doesn't say anywhere. So we have to do a little work. We have to do a little research. We have an ancient letter by an early church father, Ignatius. I don't know if you ever heard of him. But this is a few years kind of after the New Testament was kind of put together. He was what they called a bishop. So a bishop was an overseer of multiple churches. So he was a bishop of these churches in Asia Minor. And he writes a letter to the church in, guess where? Colossae. He writes a letter to the Colossians church. And this is what he says in the letter. Are you ready? Since then, in the name of God, I receive your entire congregation in the person of Onesimus, a man of inexpressible love. And get this, and your pastor. And your pastor. I beseech you in Christ Jesus to love him and all who are like him. It's like, what? So not only does Philemon not press charges, right? Not only does he not do that to this runaway slave, but he supports Onesimus to the point where he becomes the next pastor in the church of Colossae. My question to us, to me, to you, is who is your Onesimus? Who's your Onesimus? Who are you advocating for? Who are you trying to help? Who are you trying to set free? Who are you seeing potential in that no one else sees potential in? Everyone, I think all of us need to be that kind of friend to somebody. Someone maybe you know right now needs that kind of friend. The next may be the most universal type of friend. And that's this, a compassionate friend who is with me through it all. I think everybody needs this kind of friend. So when I was thinking about this kind of friend, there's this whole genre of stories and pictures on the internet, and you've probably seen them before, of unlikely pairs, unlikely friendships. Just show a couple of them. I think I got 3 of them, Lydia. Put one up there. This is the friendship, and there's stories behind all of these. I wish I had time to tell you about them. But of this dog and the duck and this a lion and a bear, and there's another one where there is a lion, a bear, and a tiger. Believe it or not, and they're great friends. And this cheetah and a dog. And what is it about these pictures and these stories that just warm our heart? Don't they? They warm your heart. They do me. You know, especially when you read the story and you hear there's one about this elephant and the dog, and the elephant they tried to kill it, these poachers, to take its ivory, and this elephant was so depressed, and this dog comes along, and they become best friends. They were absolutely inseparable. Let me tell you another story. We had a Rottweiler. Her name was Montana, and we had a cat, and the cat we still have. And one day they ran away. I think they just went on an adventure. And somehow they got up there by the GBU, you know, the park up there, and next door there's a house. A guy that lives there is a dentist. And somehow through a friend of mine who is a policeman, found out where they were, and we went up there and talked to them. And she told me this story. She said she walked in the back of her property and she saw a Rottweiler there, and she goes, "Well, I know these dogs are bad." She goes, and I was scared, I didn't know what to do, so I yelled. I said, "You stay right there." Montana was so sweet. You know, she said, "Sit down." And Montana sat down, and she walked up, and behind Montana was a cat. She's like, "What the?" You know, and so she got Montana. She put Montana inside they had another outbuilding, and inside that building was unfinished. Montana was in that building going absolutely berserk in there, trying to get out and scratching, barking continually, and the cat was outside the door. And she said, she wants that cat. She opened the door, let the cat in. Montana was fine. Montana was fine. So she tried, she couldn't, Montana didn't have a collar on. She said she tried to find a home for the dog, and she found a home for the dog in a day. And she's told me, she said, "But I told him you have to take the cat too." She goes, "We don't want a cat." "Well, they're a pair." You know. Anyways, these kind of stories, we resonate with stories like this and pictures like this, because this is a universal kind of friendships. Listen to this. He says this in Colossians 4:10. "My fellow prisoner Aristarchus," I don't know if that's how you pronounce his name or not, "sends his greetings." Now, it doesn't say much about him, other than it says he was my fellow prisoner. And so I've read some scholars, and scholars, this is what they believe. I don't know where they get the information. I'm just passing on to you what I read, okay? Scholars believe that he wasn't a legal prisoner. Like, he wasn't arrested. That he was one who just went in, and because Paul was under house arrest, went in and was there with Paul. Just there with him. Just sat with him, right? Paul's in prison. Well, no one should be here. No one should be here alone. And so this is the kind of person that comes and just has compassion. He's just there with you. I'll never forget, my brother-in-law one time was going through a very difficult time in his business, right? And it was late at night, and I got a phone call, and he said, "Can you just come over?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure." And I just went over, and you know, he's married to my sister and kids, and I'm single, and I got no care in the world, and he's trying to provide for a family, has a business and everything, and I had nothing I could offer him except what? My presence. My presence. And you might want to call it that. You might want to call it just you know, this is just about being present and being there. It's been said that this type of friend is when you are in a corner, or they're in your corner when they see that you are cornered, right? You know, whenever you're hard pressed. Proverbs 17 said this: "A friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for a time of adversity." So maybe you're not a Paul, maybe you're not a Tychicus, but maybe you're this kind of person, right? Who's just there, right? Who's there with empathy, with compassion. You're not trying to be there with wise words of wisdoms and solve problems. You're just there to put your arm around somebody, you know, when they're in their their prison of depression, or prison of despair or addiction, or maybe even literal prison. My point is, if you're this kind of person is important in our lives. To have this kind of person and to be this kind of person. You know, when Michelle and I got married, there was a friend of mine, his name was Craig Corbin. And Craig, you know, his parents grew up in Africa, and so he had a lot of African ways in him, right? But he came to our wedding. He knew no one else, well, maybe one or two people, but other than that, no one else in our wedding. And he stayed until the very end, until we drove away in the car. And after we left, he wouldn't leave until we left. As soon as we left with Pete and Connie. As soon as we left, he got in his car and drove back to Missouri from Michigan. Just there to show his support, to be a compassionate, loving friend. This kind of friend is important. The next one, number 4, is a restored friend who God redeems after a fall. Now I want you to pay attention to this. Colossians 4:10, it says this, as does Mark, the cousin of Barnabas. You have received instructions about him. If he comes to you, welcome him. Okay, fair enough. Mark. I'll tell you something, this is an incredible story. The story behind these simple words is amazing. So let's talk about it for a minute, right? Mark, you may know, goes with Paul and Barnabas on a mission. Midway through, when things get tough, what does Mark do? Mark's a young guy. Mark says, enough's enough. And he bails on Paul and Barnabas. And Paul he's furious. He's furious at Mark. Says he's just this unreliable youth. He actually feels betrayed by him. Okay? Fast forward a little bit. They're going to go on their next missionary journey, and they're kind of putting together their team. And Barnabas says, hey, I know who we should take. And Paul says, who? He says, I think we should take Mark. Let's give him a second chance. And Paul goes, not a chance. You know, I love that this story's in the Bible, because Paul we think of as this giant of the faith, don't we? Paul, I mean, he's just unbelievable, you know, and so wise and so mature. And he says, no, we're not taking Mark. No, I don't trust him. I don't want him. You know what Barnabas means? Barnabas, the name, means son of encouragement. Son of encouragement. And Barnabas is like, you know, Paul, are you kidding me? Let's give the guy a second chance. And Paul says, no, we're not giving him a second chance. Listen, this caused such division. Let's read what it says. Acts 15:39. Their disagreement, Paul and Barnabas, their disagreement was so sharp that they separated. This is when Paul and Barnabas went their separate ways. It said, Barnabas took John Mark with him and sailed for Cyprus. Paul chose Silas and left. Listen, Paul and Barnabas are these unbelievably, great men of God, you know, followers of Jesus, doing great work, very, very mature. They have a falling out and they separate, never to be together again. It's like, you know, Yoko split up, Paul McCartney and John, and Mark splits up Barnabas and Paul, right? Now, here's the thing I want you to know. Just hear me on this for a minute, okay? Life is messy. Don't you agree? Life's messy. We make mistakes. We make, and it's easy to see the mistakes someone else makes, isn't it? It's easy to see their mistakes. And it's easy to think, oh, well, you know, I'd never do that. I'm not so sure. Because life is complicated. That's why the Bible tells us, don't judge until you can walk in someone else's shoes. Is that possible? It's not possible. It's not possible to go and live their life, to understand what they have been through, what they're going through, what their feelings are, what their emotions are. that led them to make a decision that you deem is so terrible, so terrible. But what gives me hope in my own life is Paul. Paul even had trouble with this. Paul even did it. Paul judged Mark. Now, here's the thing. It's not the end of the story. Mark ends up being mentored by a guy by the name of Peter. Maybe you've heard of him. Peter had his own times. He's no stranger to messing up, is he? Peter isn't. And Peter knows all about second chances. And maybe this is why Peter mentors him. Listen, 1 Peter 5:15 says this, "Your sister church here in Babylon sends you greetings, and so does my son Mark." Then years later, Mark's relationship with Paul is even restored right here in this verse. Don't know all the details behind it, but it's restored. He says, "As does Mark, the cousin of Barnabas. You have received instructions about him. If he comes to you, welcome him." What's he saying? Listen, Mark's a good guy. Mark's a good guy. Yeah, he may have messed up, but that's okay. We all mess up. Life can be hard sometimes. And so Paul is saying, listen, I think he's validating him, isn't he? He's saying he's a good guy. And if that was the end of the story, that would even be great, wouldn't it? If that was the end of the story, but there's more. Mark gets to do something that only 3 other guys in the history of the world got to do. Write a gospel. Matter of fact, Mark writes the first gospel. Mark's life is a testament to life after failure. And friends, not a second-rate life either, but a great life, a wonderful life. Because why? Because we serve a God of the second chance. And God endorses those who we may falsely call a failure. And here's the thing, friends. If Jesus, let me look at me just for a minute. If Jesus is really at work in your life, really at work, I think that this will be a hallmark of how we live. If he's truly at work. Because this is what he does. He gives a second chance. A third chance. How many are grateful for second chances? Second chances, third chances. I know I am. And I want to be that kind of person. Now, the last 2 we'll just go through real fast. 5 is, not because they're not important, they're extremely important. But 5 is a praying friend who remembers my need. Epaphras, a member of your own fellowship and a servant of Christ Jesus, sends you his greeting. Listen to this. He always prays earnestly for you, asking God to make you strong and perfect, fully confident that you are following the whole will of God. I can assure you that he prays hard for you, and also for the believers at Laodicea and Hierapolis. Colossians 4:12 and 13. Prays earnestly also can be translated fights. Maybe it's where we get this term that we use, prayer warrior, right? Somebody who fights for you. Oftentimes, a lot of times, Carl tells me, "Jeff, I want you to know Marie and I are praying for you and Michelle. I'm praying for the church." And I know he's sincere, and I believe him. So I want you to know that. I want you to know that I don't know if anybody else is. He doesn't say this, but I don't know if anybody else is, but I'm praying for you. I'm praying for you. And I so appreciate that. And so I hope you have praying friends in your life. The last one is this. The last one, number 6, is everybody needs a sarcastic friend who cuts you till you bleed. I'm just kidding. That's a joke. Christy's the only one that got that, I think. Everybody's waiting to go, oh, sarcastic. Why do we need a sarcastic friend? No, we all need the third one. That's this, an inspiring friend who helps me succeed. He says this, Colossians 4:14. He says, our dear friend Luke, the doctor. So, we all know who Paul is, right? we know Paul is writing the most books in the New Testament, right? Isn't that true? Do you know who wrote more of the New Testament, though? Luke. Paul wrote 13 letters in the New Testament. Luke only wrote 2. But Paul's letters make up 23% of the New Testament. Luke's 2 letters amount to 27%. Luke wrote more than Paul. Luke may have been one of the only people on the face of the earth that was any match for Paul. Any match for him at all. In terms of his ability, in terms of his talent, in terms of his intellect, in terms of his ambition, in terms of his impact. So listen, it's vital to have friends like this in your life, right? Friends who can inspire you to do more, to do greater things. Did you know that J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis were friends long before either one of them became famous? They're friends. And they spurred each other on. Steven Spielberg and George Lucas were friends long before their biggest hits. And so we all need these kind of people in our life to spur. I want the band, why don't you guys come up? I asked the band and Brock to sing a special song for us today in kind of wrapping up this message and this whole series. I want to just close with this. Paul was in prison and he had bad eyesight and he probably had someone else writing for him. But at the end, Paul says this. It's like Paul says, okay, that's great. You got everything down I said? I got everything down. Okay, give me the paper. Give me the parchment. Takes the parchment. Give me a pen. He says this, I, Paul, now I'm writing this with my own hand. He said, remember my chains. And he says, grace be with you. Grace be with you. So my question is, do you have friends in your life like this? How do we get friends like this? I think one of the most important things we do is that we honor them. Paul is here. He is honoring them one after another after another. I hope that you can see this. I hope you can see in his letter he's mentioning all these people, right, that are his specialty teams. Not that they're less, but they're so important, so valuable in his life. My point is this. My point is Paul isn't stingy with his praise, is he? He's not stingy with it. You know, I was listening to Craig, I'm going to finish with this one last story. I was listening to Craig Groeschel talk one time. He's a pastor out in Oklahoma, a mega church. He has like 13 churches all across the country, kind of like Andy Stanley. So when I go here, I've been to some pastors' conference with the 2 of them. And he said that his wife told him one time, he said, Craig, when you're in the foyer talking to somebody, and you're shaking their hand, you're always like looking past them. Like this, looking for someone else, someone kind of more important, right? He said, you need to pay attention to the one in front of you. You ever see somebody meet like a celebrity? I watch sometimes people meet Pete, played for the Steelers, and wow, they shake his hand, they look at him, and right, and rightly so. I mean, that's a huge accomplishment. You played in the NFL, I don't care. That's a huge accomplishment. So I see people just looking, wow, it's like so nice to meet you, right? They don't even know him at all. So nice to meet you, and the conversations kind of get centered in and focused in, or focused on them. Friends, that's the way we should be to everybody that we meet. That person at that moment is the most important person. To make them feel special. Not be looking for the next opportunity or somebody better than the one that's in front of you right now. But make that person feel special. I hope, friends, that you have friends like this in your life. I know I do. But I also hope that you can be this kind of friend. You can be this kind of friend. I hope you took notes, or I hope you took mental notes or something, Maybe you can go back through and you can kind of read through this, or you can take some of the stories and kind of look them up. This is important stuff. I hope that we learn to focus on friends. Not just that, but the whole book of Colossians. I think it was a wonderful book. Hope that you enjoyed the series and that you gained from it. I'm going to close in prayer, and we're going to let the band do this song. They're doing it for me, and I appreciate it so much, you guys. Father, thank you so much for today. Thank you that that this letter that Paul wrote to this church in Colossae, thank you that it's been preserved. And in large part due to a man by the name of Tychicus, who delivered this letter. And that we have it in our possession some 2,000 years later to read, to study, to glean from, to become all that you want us to be. Let me thank you in Jesus' name.